Hello, everybody. Welcome again to AZ Security, the new channel in which we present the latest security technology of the Azure landscape. My name is Dieland Paardenkoper, Cloud Architect at IT Impressive. And today I have a new guest in our midst, and that is Dwaine Ridderhof. Hello, Dwaine. Can you introduce
Hey,
yourself?
yes, hi. Thank you for inviting me to the session, for hosting me here. I'm Dwaine Ridderhof. I work at for myself, and I'm collaborating at multiple customers, such as National Cybersecurity Center and Ivo Rechtspraak, as a solution engineer and also platform engineer. And previously worked at Microsoft. Left there in 2023. And
Really?
then started freelancing, as I already mentioned.
Nice. And how long are you MCT? I heard that you're MCT, right?
Yes, indeed. I needed to look up that actually, but already since 2019. But
Oh,
not that active yet. So I'm going to start delivering more training sessions soon.
okay.
At Microsoft, I had the opportunity to follow in a training. So I believe it was named Essential Trainers, which I needed for my role at that moment. And then I was also eligible to apply for the MCT track. So that was in
Cool.
2019 already.
And which parts of the Microsoft are you familiar with? Is it more on the security side or infrastructure?
Yeah, it's more at infrastructure. So before I joined Microsoft in 2016, I worked as a network engineer.
Okay.
And yeah, I always had still the love with infrastructure. But at the beginning, I focused more on the mobility side. So developing modern workplaces,
Okay.
focusing on Windows 10. So helping customers to adopt that. And then I believe after 2 years, I started to focus more on Azure, and it was mainly at the infrastructure part. So I found again the love for Azure networking. And nowadays more broader, I like to focus more on for example, the governance, but also the security aspects, like all the cool capabilities you have with Enter ID, such as conditional access.
Yeah, that's an amazing
Um,
platform. A lot of
yeah,
opportunities.
a lot of opportunities indeed. Yeah, but also landing zones, for example, and see how you can enable workloads to do most of them themselves. But as an organization, ensure that you stay compliant to the regulations. Um,
Cool. It's amazing that you brought it up because this is the topic. Like, what are the lessons learned in implementing Azure Landing Zones?
yeah.
Um, First of all, can you talk for the audience who just joined in? What is an Azure Landing Zone?
Yeah, of course, I will do my best. So, and yeah, I believe a few years ago, Microsoft started with providing more guidance regarding landing zones. At that time, it was named Enterprise Scale Landing Zones. Later on, nowadays, it's more familiar as Azure Landing Zones, and it provides guidance for the Azure platform, how you can set up the platform components, so more like the central things that workloads might need to develop their applications. Think of connectivity, identity and access management, and on the other hand, more the landing zone aspect that you can hand out to workload owners or application owners. And it provides like for example, an Azure subscription with governance standards or more the guardrails in which an application can be deployed, and then that you ensure compliancy of the regulations that apply to that organization.
Okay, so sort of, I have my platform teams that are separate from all the others, which are centralizing components like centralized management firewall networks.
Yeah,
I
indeed.
saw.
Yeah.
And then the landing zones, which are basically a sort of subscription bounded into guardrails of policies. This is accepted, this is not conform the business, which is a sort of playground that you would give a little bit freedom to developers.
Yeah, I think that's a very nice summary. And then you can, for example, also differentiate in what kind of environments that application acts, and based on that, maybe loosen controls or tighten controls. So, for example, in development, give a little bit more development freedom, and then in production, have everything tightly and strict to the organizational standards.
Cool, cool. I think you triggered a lot of people that you're just joining in. Just a short question before we start with your presentation. How long do you work with landing zones?
I think around six years ish.
Since it was released, I guess.
Yeah, actually, already before that, I think I still remember that at a few of my customers, we didn't have the actual landing zone adopted, and when it came into more the preview period, with a lot of work with the product group and the community at Microsoft that worked on that to see if we could also retrofit it to that environment.
Cool.
So great from the beginning, indeed.
Wow. Well, I will say the stage is yours if you want to present something.
Of course, yeah. Let me share my screen. So I thought it might be interesting to talk about a few challenges that I noticed, and need to reform this a bit. Okay, yeah. I would like to share a few of the challenges, and hope that you can overcome those as well. Maybe by a few of the examples that I would like to give. So, for example, a challenge on how you can ensure that your workloads have the right autonomy, or sometimes you also need to deploy more like platform managed resources to facilitate in connectivity. And that virtual network requires to be deployed in a landing zone, in a subscription. But maybe from an organizational perspective, you need to keep control on certain aspects of that network. Maybe the link to your hub environment that facilitates hybrid connectivity. Maybe you want to put some controls in place. And the last challenge, the workload identity, which the landing zone owner, the application owner, can use to deploy things to the landing zone. How you can put some security controls into place to avoid misuse. So, for example, if someone has the credentials, you want to avoid that it can be used outside of the organizational boundaries.
All right. I see a lot of new topics. Maybe for the people that are watching, ALZ, SLZ, can you?
Yeah, let's start. Let's start with that. So this is a brief example of what ALZ and SLZ is. So there are two variants of landing zones. The more familiar Azure Landing Zone guidance, which I already elaborated on what it entails. And then you have a more special flavor of it that's focused on sovereign landing zones. So for organizations that require more sovereignty, that there are additional controls in place that enforce confidentiality or help to become sovereign. Okay. So if you focus on the right side of my slide that I'm sharing, what ALZ provides is like a management group structure. Like, for example, starting from the top, the tenant root group, and then in there having a place for platform components, like connectivity and your things that you want to have in place to enable hybrid connectivity, such as an express route. and in the middle having the landing zones place where you place the various subscriptions, landing zones that you assign to application owners.
Right,
And the
that's for
main
our
differentiation. Sorry.
That's for our development teams, right?
Yeah,
The
indeed.
DevOps teams.
Yeah. And
Right.
then the main differentiation between ALZ and SLZ is the confidential part that you see over there. And then Microsoft provide guidance like built-in initiatives, which are Azure policy sets. So like a group of policies, Azure policies, that can be deployed on those confidential management groups. And that then, for example, enforce that you use confidential compute, that you need to have an HSM into place with certain keys for your infrastructure. I don't want to dive into that because I think the main purpose of this is that if you are working with landing zones, there's a lot of guidance available, like I showed here, and with a lot of code that you can just use out of the box. That's available on a GitHub repository. But in my perspective, if you want to guide landing zones, there's a lot of room how you are how you set the guardrails for application owners, for the development teams. So, for example, if you focus on role-based access controls, so like the permissions that you give the developer teams, ALC and SLC does describe some roles like subscription owner of an application owner or a network manager, but there might be your organization might require certain controls where you still need to think about. If you, for example, zoom into such a role, it contain an RBAC role contains out of actions, so things that you are allowed to do, and you can describe not actions, so things that you would not like to delegate to a developer team. And if you open one of those roles, for example, you see that authorization may not be written. The authorization action is not allowed to do, but that's more on a control plane. You also have a data plane. So, for example, if you have a key vault, that's if you want to configure that key vault, that's the control plane. But if you want to save secrets to it or read secrets out of it, you also have the data plane. So how are you going to deal with those kind of roles? Do you allow the developer team to assign roles that focus more on the data plane, so that they assign themselves the key vault reader role, or maybe an administrative kind of role where they can also save secrets to that key vault? There's still room in the ALC guidance that is out there how you would like to facilitate that. And that's one of the challenges that I would like to describe a little bit further in my presentation.
Cool. So if I'm trying to recapture, so basically Azure is provisioning permissions in a subscription, and if it's too wide, you're basically saying like, well, you can limit it specific on the actions or not actions for that matter. And
Indeed.
That you can combine basically on one subscription or on a group of subscriptions, depending on the positioning on the management group, right?
Indeed, yeah. And this would be a kind of RBAC role that you can assign to the developer team when they request a landing zone. So then you provide them with a subscription with a set of actions that they're allowed to do. And I see at the customers where I have been that every customer is doing this on its own on a different manner. Because it needs to be tailored a little bit to the governance or the organization that you're into.
Indeed, yeah, it's a good start with what Microsoft is offering, but if you're giving your owner permissions away, then they're lost, right? So in the security mind, least privileges is the precedence. So this is very helpful.
Yeah,
creating your
absolutely.
own custom rules,
Yeah.
airlock rules. Cool. Okay.
Yeah, and that's maybe something to dive in a little bit deeper because you already mentioned it. Least privilege. Yeah, you want to. That's a good bridge. So, how do you to stay in control on that? But keep in mind that you also want to give a developer team the right autonomy. So you also want to, empower them to develop their application, and not that for every request they need to go to the central platform team, for example, to raise support request. That's not really,
That's
providing
not
them.
flexible.
No, indeed. Least privilege is a thing, but also just-in-time access. There's the best practice to not always have the highest privileges active, only when you need them. So, for example, use privilege identity management to activate the role when you need it. And then the latter, that you should not have standing privileges. So I think this in general is a challenge for many organizations when you start adopting Azure and start working with landing zones. So maybe dive into some lessons learned, Dino?
Yeah, always.
Yeah. So one of the things I always would like to start with is defining like the application or the product or the workload, depending on how you name them. And then recognize the roles that you have in such a team. So for example, I think it is very good to assign an owner and someone that's responsible over the application, and also have someone a backup owner in case the business owner wants to go on vacation or maybe gets ill, that someone else can take over. And then recognize the people that do the actual work, so the developers and operators. And as latter, someone that is interested in the product and would like to read in the Azure portal about what has been developed or what the compliancy level is of the application resources. And then from that autonomy perspective, also provide self-service capabilities. So what you also always like to do, or what I always like to do, is to provide the landing zone, recognize those roles, and then ensure that the membership to those roles, so for example, developer role, that someone can just apply to it, and then that the owner get the request and approve it. And that can be accomplished with using access packages, for example. But you can also have a central identity and access management system that provides that capability. That doesn't really matter as long as you have the capability to manage membership to a security group, because this solution that I am working to is based on membership of security groups. Entra ID offers the entitlement management capability and access packages specifically as part of that. And in there you can, for example, recognize resources. So in my case, I fairly focus on using groups. And then that you can apply to this access package, and with that you become a member of a certain group. In detail, that looks like this. So from the access package, you get assigned to the developer ST group, and the owner gets the request to accept or not accept that. And I will come back to this ST thing in a bit. But you can apply this logic to those various roles. So to the delegated owner, to the stakeholder and operator, for example, to be complete of all the roles I just mentioned.
So if I may, so it is a sort of workflow what you're seeing?
Yeah, it's definitely a workflow and a process.
Cool. So Microsoft is offering a workflow to automate requests instead of calling the service desk like, hey, I have to add 5 new people.
Yeah, that's provided by that access package capability.
Cool. Nice.
With a nice self-service portal in place, which I will demo in a bit, how that works. and then ensuring that the request ends up with the owner. And if you want, you can also configure access reviews, so that, for example, every quarter the owner gets a review request if the membership is still actual, or even the person itself to say, okay, yeah, still needs to be a member of this developer role.
Nice. Yeah, that's a pain, right? If people are leaving the company or
Indeed,
switching roles, they always
Indeed.
have the permissions from other departments.
The movers. Cool. Indeed. Now and then, remember that we talked about the least privilege and just in time. For that, I implemented, or a few of my customers, we thought of a solution of that in combination with access packages. And for that, I want to take you through that solution, because I also would like to demo that in a few minutes. So remember that we talked about access packages. So developer requested access to the developer role of a certain workload or an application. Now, once the owner approved that member gets assigned to the applicable security group. And after that, we actually, as part of the landing zone, we used privileged identity management on another security group, which we name just developer without the ST. And we are using that to assign more the right capabilities or permissions for the specific landing zone, for the subscription. So on one side, when you get access to that the ST security group, from that moment on, you have the ability to read everything in the landing zone, and you will start seeing the capability in privileged identity management to elevate to another role or to another group, which has this role, for example, or it can be used to assign more the data plane specific things. That you can also assign yourself more specific roles for other purposes. So for the data plane purpose, for example.
Okay, so it can be specific roles in Entra, but it is also be possible specific permissions within a subscription or specific Azure resources.
Yeah, indeed.
Cool.
And on top of that, you can also provide the capability to to enable more on a conditional basis, that you are also allowed to assign yourself other RBAC roles, which are more least privileged for a specific duty or job that you require to do.
Okay.
And for that, you can make use of attribute-based access controls, or also ABAC. So you have RBAC, which are more the roles, and then when you assign an RBAC role, so for example the landing zone owner, you can leverage ABAC, so attributes, to say, okay, if you apply to specific conditions, you're also allowed to do something else, and that something else is for example, if you dive into that, you can say, okay, you're allowed to assign a set of other RBAC rules. So by default, if you have full control of your landing zone, then you are allowed to assign like more than 250 RBAC roles.
Wow.
But by leveraging ABAC, you have more control, and you can limit that list of roles that someone is able to assign itself to a selective list. That is, for example, that can be roles that you assess from a security perspective, or that you recognize as being valuable for an application or a development team.
Okay. Yeah, well, it gives you more flexibility, right?
Yeah, indeed. That's the main purpose, yeah.
Cool.
And then eventually the end stage from an identity and access management perspective on that landing zone could be something like this. So you have the roles, most of them by default have reader permissions over the landing zone.
Right.
And then specifically for like non-production environments, or development or test environments, provide the capability to also do some things manually if you want to experiment, for example. By providing in this case I've used a custom role, the landing zone owner role, which is limited to do a few things, for example networking an area, but empowers them to elevate to that role and then do things manually in that landing zone.
Yeah, basically giving them the maximum freedom,
Yeah.
the limited scope, basically, right?
Yeah. Indeed,
Not that they are deploying a new firewall or, I don't know, something which is hitting the platform activities.
Indeed.
Right, cool.
So with that, maybe a demo?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Show us, right.
So I will show you two roles. On one end, the developer, and a little bit later, the owner role. So I was talking about access packages. In this case, I prepared some configuration, but and provided an access package that entails a specific language for a specific landing zone.
Okay.
Via the My Access portal, you have an overview of the access packages that are available in your organization and that you are allowed to request. That's, for example, this one. So with that, I have the ability as a developer to say, okay, I would like to have access to that. So for demo purposes, I get access to a landing zone. Now, with that, I request request access.
Okay.
Now, the request is submitted, and the owner will get notified that someone did request access to his access package. So if I hop over to another screen,
and now you're the manager, right?
No, indeed. Now I'm the manager, the business owner. I should be seeing an approval request. There it is.
There he is. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm able to review it, see some of the details. Now, looks okay. And then submit it. Now.
Cool. And
so
how long does it take, Dwaine, that after approval is done by the manager? Or you need?
During a demo, too long, but normally it's less than a minute.
Less than a minute, okay.
Yeah, because but now we will be getting access to that security group, and that security group has reader permissions on a subscription.
Okay.
So I must be seeing this in a few seconds, hopefully. But that's what I mentioned during a demo. This is always too long.
Well, at least we're seeing that you don't have permissions, so that's a good sign.
Indeed, yeah. So now I'm not seeing a subscription. And now it has been giving me the reader role.
Cool.
So now I'm able to see specific things. Now, and then we also talked about privileged identity management. So this provides me the capability to hop to another role that has more permissions, for example.
Okay.
And that access package provided me also the capability to become member of another group.
So I see in your screen that there's a time window available.
Yeah.
Or at least it was in your screen.
Yeah, I will show that in a bit. I just wanted to activate it so that it already becomes active, because this takes a minute or so.
Okay.
And then I can maybe elaborate on the options that you have.
Cool.
So now it's doing the actual elevation. So now it's enabling my identity with the access to a security group, and that security group is a different one that I became member of initially. but it's used to assign me a little bit more permissions to the landing zone.
Okay. So for this one, you don't have to get the approval. It's automated away.
Indeed, that's a good one. So normally you might want to have a 4i principle in place so that another developer of your team reviews the request. Or maybe on certain environments, like on development, you want to provide more freedom to the developer, and then you decide not to set an approval on an elevation, which I have not done for the demo purposes. And indeed, yeah. And what you just already mentioned, you have the ability to also set the duration. So if I need this role for 1 hour, for example, or for the whole day, no, it's best practice to shorten this. Of course, if you only need it for an hour, just activate it for an hour, or enable it at advanced. So this becomes useful if you do have an 4i principle in place and need an approval of a co-worker, then you can already plan in advance for that, and then someone can review it during working hours. And then, for example, if you need to do a change after working hours, you have that permissions becoming active at a certain time frame.
So from an audit perspective or security perspective, I have also my audit trails intact, basically, because I can explain why my account is registered, basically, and I also have to fill in the reason why, unless I can fill in something else, but then my manager will kick in like, hey, what did you do? So it's a good way to fill in your audit trails as well. So nice.
Absolutely. Now, and then with this, I should have gotten a little bit more permissions than the reader I had initially, and it's already showing here that I have now specific access. That is because I am using a custom role. So now if I look at the roles that are active on my identity, wrong button.
Yeah, there it is.
Initially, this one. I'm also becoming a landing zone owner, and here you can see that we are leveraging RBAC. Now, in this case, I configured it that it allows me a shorter set of RBAC roles that I can assign to someone else. So normally this will be a very long list, but now it's limited to 10. And in the condition, I've set that I'm only allowed to assign that to service principals or to the developer role.
Right, sure.
I have more security groups in Enter-ID, but I limited it.
So even though you have given specific permissions, those permissions are limited only to the purposes which the team member should have, right?
Yeah, indeed.
Cool.
And this provides me as a developer with the autonomy that I can say, okay, I'm using Azure Arc with the Kubernetes. I need this role for the data plane activities, which by default the landing zone role is not providing me. So then I can enable myself or my service principal that I'm leveraging for automation purposes with that role to do that activity in the least privileged manner.
That is very nice to have. Kubernetes is one of the technologies which is used very often, but getting total access or admin access, that you want to limit very, very closely. So that's a good example. And if I'm new to this technology and I have already an Azure environment, do I have to have specific licenses to do this, the entitlement management?
Yes, you need to have P2 licenses, I believe, for that.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah,
great.
That's a good one, indeed.
Okay.
Yeah, with that, we can maybe dive into the other challenge if you're okay with that. Yeah, and that was regarding like more the platform managed resources. So normally you see when you are adopting the ALZ that you also recognize more like a platform team that facilitates, the platform components, and that example of connectivity, for example. And then you have other app development teams requesting landing zones. Now, you can opt to have some central managed resources into the landing zone to provide connectivity to on-prem, or to facilitate more in the automation that you might want to enforce as an organization, and where you require managed identity to deploy from tools like GitHub or Azure DevOps to that landing zone. But maybe you do not want a workload to adjust things into that managed identity, or to adjust a budget threshold that you have set. So that's a challenge, like how you're going to manage that and ensure that the workload, that the development team is not really accidentally throwing away those resources or adjusting it. And for that, I like to use deployment stacks, and that's like a more logical grouping of resources that you can configure, and you actually you can leverage existing template languages that you're familiar with, like for example ARM or Bicep, and then with the different deployment command line, like for example in the AC, you can ensure that it becomes a deployment stack. So all the resources that you specified in the template, like maybe to show that, for example, I have a Bicep file here, and in there I deploy a resource group, a key vault, and a network.
Maybe a little bit enlarging your screen. It's a little bit small now. That is helpful.
Yeah.
It still reminds me about in the past we call it blueprints. Is it the newest version of blueprints?
Yeah. So blueprints is deprecated. Yeah. So I think this is the new capability.
Cool. Just noticing.
Yeah.
Deployment stacks is the way forward. Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah. And the beauty of this is that you can just leverage existing templates that you already have, and then just using a different command line prompt to deploy that deployment stack with specific things into place. And then I will switch back quickly to my presentation, because you are allowed to set various things on the deployment stack. You can, for example, say, okay, I deny deletion of resources into a deployment stack, or I deny write activities to the resources that are part of the stack. And then maybe you want to exclude a specific principal that is allowed to do some things in the deployment stack. So think of that central platform team. Maybe the identity that they use is allowed to modify the virtual network, but the development team not. Then by excluding the principal that is used by the platform team, you provide that capability to modify it still, and then all the other principals or identities are not capable of adjusting the VNet.
Okay, so instead of fixing it afterwards with delete logs or read-only logs, which is also a technology within Azure.
Indeed.
You can say like, well, I bundle my complete application stack or innovation whatsoever, and just fulfilling also the RBAC needs or the limitations of their service principal in their subscription.
Yeah, indeed. Okay. You can of course also monitor on drift. Or the other examples that you mentioned, and this is just one of the ways to prevent it up front.
Cool. That's a way forward. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is a little bit more in the graphical form what you can accomplish with it, like I already mentioned, but maybe it's nicer to just show this in action.
Show us.
So when I move back to my developer, on the subscription level, you can recognize those deployment stacks. So it can live on various scopes. It can also live on a management group, for example. But in this case, I've deployed it on the landing zone subscription. And as part of the deployment stack, I've deployed a key vault, virtual network. And you also see that child resources become part of it. And I've excluded a few actions. So this becomes useful if you work more in an iterative manner. So maybe at the beginning when you start adopting landing zones, you might want to restrict all activities on the virtual network, for example. But later on in the journey, you have all the controls in place by leveraging Azure policy, and then you start opening up certain scenarios or use cases. So, for example, at a certain moment, I would like to provide my workload the ability to create subnets themselves, because normally they came to my platform team with a request, okay, I need subnet 1, 2, 3, I need security rules. Now, if you become a big platform, that takes a lot of time. So it provides the capability to exclude certain actions. So
basically, in this, you give a little bit of maturity, or when the organization is a little bit more mature in the Azure experience, you're giving them piece by piece more what a platform normally says, like, this is ours.
Yeah, indeed. And if you show this, if you demo this into action, I'm, for example, not allowed to deploy a key vault, to delete a key vault. So when I try that, it will restrict me because of a deny assignment. But if I would like to deploy a subnet, which is one of the excluded actions, it should be able to create that.
Just out of curiosity, if I'm using that deployment stack, is it the lock which is preventing me, or is it really something else behind the scenes?
It's really something else. It's maybe you can compare it with a new resource type. The reason that I used a custom landing zone owner role is that I also restricted the modification of a deployment stack as a not action in there.
Okay.
So it's something else than a lock.
Cool.
But yeah, I think one of the benefits is that it provides really fine-grained abilities to control platform resources.
Yeah, I agree. And also, I think a lot of happiness on the security side because they're seeing more.
Indeed.
But also I'm seeing possibilities for development teams. Like, I want to grab more and more flexibility because the majority is growing.
Yeah.
But also a shift of less work on the platform team side because
absolutely
you're giving more power to the workload teams without the worrying like they are going to destroy everything or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's like future proof. So by time you can enable new scenarios to in a self-service perspective towards the development teams.
How do customers react on this? Because you have explained how you implemented this. How do they react on this technology?
Yeah, so for all positive things, so some customers need to become a little bit more familiar that the roles that is enforced by RBAC, that it's limited, so that they need to follow maybe a process to request new roles if that applies. But once once this is available, they are very positive with all the autonomy that they are getting.
Nice. So you're saying go forward, use deployment stacks.
Indeed, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Nice demo.
And yeah, I have one. Just the demo. I've had one last challenge. So that is regarding that workload identity. So the identity that you can use as a development team to deploy things towards your landing zone. So for example, using infrastructure as code. So like deploying that bicep that I just showed you via a managed identity to the landing zone. Certain organizations want to keep some control over that identity, that it cannot be used outside of their organization, for example. And then you can leverage conditional access. So very briefly, conditional access provides the capability within Entra ID or the applications that use Entra ID as the identity provider to recognize signals. So for example, if I log in, I can recognize my IP address, my public IP address from where I'm doing the authorization attempt, or the device, and then I can leverage that to form a decision. So to allow access with, for example, multi-factor authentication, or deny it from specific public IPs. And you can also leverage that in combination with a workload identity, which is that managed identity I just mentioned. To say, okay, I'm using custom runners or self-hosted agents that have a connectivity path to internet via a firewall, for example, and I know the IP address of that firewall, and I only allow that identity being used if it comes from that endpoint, from that IP address.
From a known source, basically.
A known source, indeed. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
This does require an additional licensing, but
it's good to know.
And if I very briefly demo that, then I already configured the identity that I'm using in secret. And then when I try to connect, now it restricts me from using this identity because I've not whitelisted this my home public IP address.
Okay.
And this is due to conditional access enforcing it. So in here I have a policy in place which targets that identity that I just showed. I'm using one condition to exclude a certain IP address. So everything else, if it comes from another IP address, then I want to block access.
Okay, so it's basically acting on, as you said, as a signal, no matter what device or endpoint it may be, or identity.
Yeah.
And from there, you have the power basically to say like, well, you are allowed or you're not allowed, or you're allowed unless. And that
Indeed.
Unless, there you have, what options do you have more? Just to have a clearance for the people who are just not familiar with conditional access.
Yeah, that's a good one. You have a lot of conditions. So you can, for example, do it based on a risk appetite of an identity or an authentication attempt. And that comes from identity protection. So for example, if you have some time frames that are worrying, in 1 minute you did atypical travel, so in 1 minute time you did an authentication attempt from America, and 1 minute later from the Netherlands. That's odd. Then identity protection might assign you a risk level, so high, medium, low. You can leverage that risk level to decide on the access. So you can, for example, then say, okay, allow access, but maybe the user need to change their password, or they need to do an additional multi-factor authentication prompt. So that's one condition, but you can also leverage the device that the authentication is performed from. So if that device is managed by the organization and if it is compliant to all the configuration and settings that are required to become compliant to regulations, or if it has the latest updates, for example. And then if that device is compliant, I will be allowed access to the application. And if the device is not compliant, so it did not have the latest security updates, then I deny access. And then it first needs to install the updates and then it gets access.
So you have you don't have a little, you have a lot of options which you can basically enable, like, unless you have jumped in all those hoops.
Indeed.
Then you're allowed to come in.
Yeah, indeed. And in this case, I'm leveraging the location condition where I exempted two public IP addresses. I just added my own home address. And then when I try to authenticate again, in this case, it did allow me, because now I recognize this as a trusted location.
Cool.
So you see in organizations that typically there's a central component from where the traffic is routing to the internet. Now that uses a public IP address, you can leverage that to decide upon the access through via condition access.
Basically, my old firewall in the past days, it's now in the cloud, right? And I have more possibilities to tune them, basically.
Yeah, and it's based, typically based on the identity. Now I combined it with some of the network controls, but the main essence is my identity and all the signals that are part of my identity and authentication needs.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. So what Microsoft is saying, the identity is the most important component in the Azure landscape, right?
Indeed. Yeah.
All right. Oh, cool. It was quite a lot, but it was also very interesting because you touched upon not only the landing zones, but also deployment stacks and combined it with conditional access. So it was 1 out of 3 or 3 out of 1. Very pleasant to see. Great demos. Thank you for all the components that you've shown.
No problem. I hope it's useful for the people that are watching.
Do you have maybe cool things to you say, like how to start or where to start?
Definitely start with the guidance that Azure Landing Zone is providing, and then maybe a few of the capabilities that we touched upon during this session. But I would advise that the go-to place is the Azure Landing Zone.
Cool. I will put that into the links in the description below for the people that want to see. There's also a community in Azure active, which explains every quarter the latest updates around Azure Landing Zones in the Bicep module or Terraform, for that matter, infrastructure as code, but also for the new latest policy updates, which they are explaining the DDD, DT details. Thank you very much for your time. Hopefully, if you want to come back for that other topic, if you touched upon the security topic later on.
Definitely.
You are very welcome. And I would say thank you very much, everybody, for listening. And hopefully till next time. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.